So thank you, Pamela, for being here with us. As you know, myself, Play is an organization that promotes the importance of play in women's well-being. Our monthly play dates help women break away from the routine of their stressful life and reconnect them with their lightness of being. The one thing we never really touched was work and play, and especially in this country, I think it's the work and play don't seem to go too well together. And so you are the author of a book that I'm going to show here that is From Workplace to Playspace, Innovative Learning and Changing Through Dynamic Engagement. And it's a guide for building a supportive workplace environment that helps people to work at their best. Since many of our members are working mothers or women, I'd like for you to tell us more about your background, your field of expertise, and how did you come to choose a subject such as play?
Yeah, it's great, and that's a great context to set up, Nadia. So thank you. And interestingly, my work began in a play space in the theater, and as a director and producer. And for me, it was very commonplace to combine work and play. And in fact, if the work wasn't playful, then we weren't innovating. We weren't really doing good work if we weren't approaching it with a spirit of play. And so as my work evolved over the years and I began using some of the techniques that I use in the rehearsal hall with organizations, I was oddly, naively shocked to discover that wasn't how everybody worked. And so one of the big discoveries I've made through the years, both teaching improvisation and some of the more collaborative arts and transferring those into organizational settings and working with organizations and adult learners, is that the spaces that we create are so important, and it actually is a little more moment to moment than concepts like culture and climate that we use in organizations. And I was so interested in this topic that I actually did some in-depth research on what happens for people as they learn to improvise, because people were reporting back these wonderful stories of personal breakthroughs and organizational transformations. And I wanted to be careful that I wasn't assuming I knew what was happening. And one of the things my research revealed was that much more than any skills and knowledge or specific strategies, people attributed their experience to expanded creative capacity to the space they co-created with their colleagues. And they created it in the moment without lots of complex strategies. But I've come to call this space play space because it truly makes room for the play of new ideas, for people to play new roles, for more play in the system, more play in terms of flexibility, and then, of course, for improvised play. And in many ways, in that context, we're reclaiming play as an essential dynamic for business success, but also hopefully taking some of the onus off that play is only for kids, or it's only something we do when we're not serious. In fact, it's something we need to remember at perhaps some of the most serious times.
Could you give us examples of companies that infuse play in their workspace?
Absolutely, and I know we'll talk about this more, but I want to make the point that there's a distinction between play as diversion, which is when we take a break. Some of the wonderful things you do through MySit Play are really wonderful examples of play as diversion. We can have play as diversion at work, where we take a little break, or we play a game, or there's a contest or something, and that creates all kinds of wonderful energy and provides people a mental break, and there are other benefits that we'll talk about. And then there's play as engagement, which is when the work itself is a form of play. People have the same level of energy and excitement and engagement as they do that we often associate with game playing. And that's when ideas are flying and people feel like they're not even aware of time passing and they're working at the top of their talent. So what I've seen is that companies that are really thriving don't make a big distinction between these two types of play, and in fact they embrace both of them. And a great example is a somewhat unexpected one, which is this very large financial institution in the Northwest called Umpqua Bank, so a very serious financial institution. But when Ray Davis took over back in 1994, he made a commitment to create a very different type of bank And one of the first things he instituted was at the very start of every day across all of their locations, and they now have more than 200 of them, he asked people to start the day with something he calls a motivational moment. And it can be anything as long as it's not religious or political, but it's often a little game or a sing-along or a little dance break. And they found that just these few minutes starting the day energizes everybody. It brings them together. They're sharing resources. They're engaging with the customers in ways that they wouldn't if they just went right to their computers and started checking email. I mean, it's a very different environment. So that's just one example, and then there are others we can talk about.
Yeah. And overall, do you think that these companies are more successful?
You know, there's really good research about this, and what we have to do is look to, there's not a ton of research on play itself at work, but there is some good research on employee engagement, which is the kind of energy people experience when they go the extra mile, they're willing to expend a discretionary effort. And what we do see is that there's a relationship between the descriptions of play at work and that level of engagement and what's traditionally called employee engagement. And engaged employees are significantly less likely to leave the organization. They tend to hang in there on difficult creative endeavors. And in terms of the bottom line, there's some research that shows that companies that have engaged employees deliver up to 39% more earnings per share to their shareholders. So it's a little bit of a triangulated relationship to connect play to employee engagement and then employee engagement to the bottom line. But they're great examples, everything from Google. We have a thriving company here in Chicago that's internationally known called Threadless that does a lot of initiatives for playing at work. Of course, Zappos is well known. And again, we see these organizations are transcending that hard line between work and play, and they're really creating an environment of high engagement.
A lot of our men are women with very busy schedules, especially in towns such as, or cities such as Chicago and New York. And I was wondering how can women have more fun at work? How do you infuse play in your daily work? So whether you are alone or whether you work with your team.
Yeah, this is a really great question, and very often we can use time as an excuse not to play, that we're under so much pressure and we've just got to get the work done. And here's where we can think of how can we make the work itself a form of play? How can we engage people in playing with some new ideas or playing new roles and switching out, shadowing people, thinking about ways we can shift perspectives so that these might not be the typical funny hats and games kind of play, but it helps create energy, and then again it expands our concept of play. Simply changing our language a little bit. So if you're in a collaborative meeting and you say, you know what, can we just play around with this idea for a few minutes? I'd love to get your input on this, or let's just take a break and play a bit. And then the other thing, and this takes remarkably little time and the returns are huge, which is just start your collaborations or brief conversation. It can be anything from a word game to a quick improvisation to passing pipe cleaners around and having people, add to the object and keep morphing and changing an object. But it just creates a little more flexibility in our thinking, openness to new ideas. And then the other thing that is a huge benefit is that play builds the social ties and the relational bonds that are actually necessary for getting the work done. And this is what companies like Umpqua have discovered, that people are way more willing to help each other out or go the extra mile when they've got that relational connection and they've actually been playful with each other.
You talked also about diversion play and engaging play at work. Could you tell me more about these two?
Yeah, again, and this is where the internet is so great because there's so many examples if you need ideas for diversionary play. And one of my favorite was when I was profiling Google, that the HR director said, well, if you walk around, the cubicles might look a little funny. We've just finished our Pimp My Cubicle contest. And people had these outlandish cubicles strung with lights and all kinds of things. And the other day they had just had Mustache Day, where everybody came to work wearing a fake mustache. And something as simple as that just shifts people's perspective. So if it's hard to take yourself too seriously if you're wearing a fake mustache in your corporate meeting. So those are some things that I really encourage people to just search around. I have a lot of these examples in my book, but they're everything from improvisation, warm-up games, and just ideas that literally take a couple of minutes and suddenly the energy shifts. You've got a 3 o'clock meeting, everybody's exhausted. Just do some little thing that brings people back into the room and feeling engaged again. And then this idea of play as engagement takes in some ways a little more time, and I think often the play as diversion creates more play as engagement because people tend to be more present in a meeting and engaged if you've shaken things up a little bit. But I also encourage people to be very mindful of their language in these kinds of collaborations, and one of the big lessons is from improvisation. Many people will know that one of the first lessons you learn in improvisation is to say yes and rather than yeah but. So if we just shift our language and we're accepting the ideas that are coming in and building on them rather than saying, oh yeah, but that's too expensive, yeah, but we tried that before, an amazing space starts getting created, and then people start jumping in and adding their ideas, and it really creates a kind of a culture where people are more open to new possibilities. So just monitoring the little micro ways that we shut down play and we shut down people exploring new possibilities.
Yeah, and ideas. That's why I love the name of the company, the English company called What If.
Yes.
It opens to so many possibilities. Why do you think play is not so supported in American companies?
Mm-hmm. It's just we've been so socialized, and from the time we're quite young, many of us in Western culture, especially the U.S., are socialized that play is for little kids or when serious things aren't happening, and our parents will tell us they'll play with us later when they're not so busy and doing important adult things. And then when we get to work, we even hear things like, okay, everybody, we need to stop playing around. Let's get serious now. And these kind of dualistic conventions around play, when in fact, when we really step back a bit, we realize that we're at our top of our talent when we're approaching things with a spirit of play. And many of the diversionary tactics for play bring people back more energized, more productive. So in fact, there's a really strong business case for playing at work. Even if we're only taking a very left brain approach to it, we can make a strong case for it.
Yeah, of course. And do you see a difference in the way women and men, their attitude towards work and play in a working environment?
I have found that while there are these broad-based stereotypes that men, often are more task-oriented and women are more relationship-oriented and connected-oriented. And that said, I have seen women that are really good at shooting down ideas and being very task-focused, and men that are very playful. So I'm always hesitant to go too far embracing the stereotypes, but just to be attuned to what individual orientations are. The good news is that I've seen that when people have just a little bit of permission to play, and it usually takes some leadership, someone who's willing to take a risk, whether it's someone in a leadership position or someone who says, hey, I just came back from a conference, or I just watched this video interview and I got some new ideas. How about if we just play around with them? I think it might make a difference for us. So it often takes somebody taking that step, but once it's been taken, it's exciting to see how things shift. So I would say possibly, and we all have to be, regardless of our gender, aware of the way culture has impacted us in a larger way and given us some mindset that work and play aren't compatible when in fact they're very complementary.
Yeah. I think I read recently a statistic that was showing that men have, it's easier for them to take time off for a lunch, have less, worry about, not, being working. When for women, they always have to make sure that they do everything, that, it's difficult for them to just remove themselves from the workload and just say, well, maybe by taking 30 minutes, I'm going to feel actually much more lively, much more rested, and I have more focus on my work. For men, it's not that complicated, to just say, hey, I can just take 30 minutes off.
Yes, that's a really good point. Sometimes we're still proving ourselves every day, and I sometimes call this the tyranny of the task, where
Yeah.
the task,
Yes.
what's right in front of you, seems so important. When if we just step back and go for a little walk, or have coffee with a friend, or take a little break, and I found I have to pay attention to this myself, and I research this and I write about it, and I can get swept up in, one more email, one more
Yes.
little thing, and not see the bigger picture. But if we don't take that time, the fresh perspectives, the ideas, the energy, all of those things are
Yeah.
often swept away.
Yeah. I have one of our mouse who works all the time. Sometimes I really have to chase her. If I know that one play date, she would. If I know that she would enjoy one play date, such as hiking, I know that she loves outdoor activities. Sometimes I have to personally take the phone several days in a row and say, you have to come, you have to come. So there is always that resistance.
Yeah, yeah.
And then once, she's, on the hill or walking, then she comes back, she says, oh my God, it's the best gift I've given to myself. And she comes back with a renewed vitality, energy.
Doing, I think, is so important for that very reason, that when there's a date and when there's some peers that might be putting a little peer pressure on you to come, once you get out the door and actually do it, and we often need someone to cajole us a little bit. I can't tell you how many times I've had the exact same experience, either for myself, who sometimes becomes resistant because there's so much work to do, or others who've joined in say, oh man, I'm so glad I came. I had to drag myself out of bed, or I had to leave this
Yeah.
pile of work behind. But it reminds us also that we're not just human doings. We're human beings, and we have these rich lives that aren't just about work. They're about connecting, engaging, discovering more of our talents, our creative spirit, and all of these things happen through play.
Physically, because I'm trying to imagine, what does a play space look like? So does it mean that in a workspace you have to have bright colors, open space, a basketball net, a pool table? What does it mean physically works, play space?
Well, all of those things are wonderful, and I always caution people not to confuse the physical environment with the social relational dynamic, because we can create play space as we are right now, over in a conversation, in a gray government office, in any context, because it's really about the social relational connection and the way we play off of each other, and truly the momentary dynamic we create. And there are wonderful spaces that and many of the companies that I profile also have these great physical spaces as well. Everything from Google's famous for its beanbag chairs and its exercise balls, and brightly colored walls, and having spaces throughout where people can gather and have informal conversations, or sit down and have a cup of coffee together. All of these foster these kinds of connections and a sense of playfulness. And that said, one of the interesting things about human nature is we tend to normalize our surroundings regardless of how wonderful and stimulating they are. So people find that, if you work at Google for months at a time, there's a point where you stop seeing the brightly colored walls, or it's just where you work. And so for that reason, we really have to, both when we're thinking about physical settings, not to keep it dynamic and keep being willing to change it around, but also to realize changing the wall color or the office layout in and of itself without any other attention to the culture won't necessarily take care of the play dynamic. It's something we really have to be mindful of every day and in all of our interactions. Designed workshops inside organizations, and when I do that, I want to listen to what's going on in the organization, what are their goals, and very often it's anything from we need to re-energize our team, or we're about to we've got a new team that's come together and we want to really create a spirit of cohesion, and in that case I'll come in. Very often I take a number of experiential things. Some of these are things modified from improvisational theater, but they're very low risk, so regardless of whether someone's an introvert or extrovert, they can experience success whether they've ever been in any kind of theatrical situation. And we start to create that space of trust and playfulness, but then also learn some key concepts so that people can sustain the kind of energy and space that we've created over time. Because any of us who've had any experience in training and development can probably design a fairly engaging afternoon or off-site workshop, but the key is leaving people with the tools that they can sustain it themselves, and they really take ownership of the process. So that's often, sometimes I'll stay with an organization for a while to support them in that transition. And then I often do keynote speeches and workshops at conferences so that people from various sectors can come together and learn things and take them back to their organizations as well.
Is it easy for you to promote the importance of Playspace in?
That is a really good question. What I found is people are more open to the idea of what the benefits are. So I often, if they're working with a team that needs to be more agile, for example, or they need to build to jumpstart their creative thinking, they'll often be open to play as a means to a certain kind of development or an organizational goal. And I'm actually okay with that. I don't have an agenda to lead with something, but I might be somewhat subversive or along the way, so that I start to help them with the mindset shift once we start working together.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking to us about the importance of play in the work environment. And if you come to New York, you have to call the mics, and we'll gather a group of working professional women who I am sure are eager to know how to make their life at work a little bit more fun.
Wonderful. I would love to do that. And thank you so much for what you're doing. It's so needed, and you're offering a wonderful space for people to tap into their creative energy and their authentic selves. So congratulations to you too.